Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. The path factor of right effort is defined in the Dhammacakka Sutta as being fourfold: the effort to arouse wholesome states that have not yet arisen, the effort to nourish and encourage wholesome states already present, the effort to prevent the arising of unwholesome states, and the effort to diminish those states, unwholesome states that are already present. So what we're seeing in this definition is that right effort is about training the mind. The formal definition of right effort is disciplining, controlling the mind, and trying to rid oneself of unwholesome states or akusala, unskillful states, and encouraging the arising of kusala, skillful or wholesome states. So the first thing we need to inquire about this is what are those states that are considered wholesome and those that are considered unwholesome. And the simplest definition is that states which are based on delusion, greed, and hatred are unskillful. That is dosa, lobha, moha. And those states which are based on their opposites, that is wisdom, loving kindness, and non-greed, renunciation, are wholesome. So that definition can serve as a general principle or guideline, but we have in our mental continuum, we experience a wide variety of different states with many nuances and many differences, many particulars. So it requires some mindfulness and attention to understand what's going on in our own minds. Understanding and knowing your state of mind, understanding it, is the first thing, and then developing it, correcting it, training it follows from that. A lot of what goes on in our mind falls under the broad categorization of, in English, we say emotions. It's a very broad kind of a catch-all quality, but it covers many different states. So we can look at some of the, beginning with the unwholesome or unskillful states that can arise in the mind. Such things as desire, greed, lust, they all fall under lobha. Anger, ill will, irritation, hatred, these fall under dosa. Confusion, ignorance, bewilderment, these fall under moha. And the first thing is to recognize when these various states arise in the mind, and not to validate them or follow them, go along with them, not to give them any value or credence. Anger, for example, is a real poison that arises in the mind and corrupts anything that we do. If we're doing it out of anger, then we're not going to be doing it well or skillfully. We're going to be making trouble for ourselves and for others. Anger is always, without exception, a mental contaminant, a poison. And there's a tendency, when we start to feel angry, there's a tendency to validate it, encourage it, feed it, and justify it. And we should resist that. And remember a principle that you are always responsible for your own mind states. And this is something people fail to see. They say, oh, he made me so angry. I can't help it, he makes me angry the way he acts. His unskillful actions are on him, but your reaction to it is on you. That's your responsibility to guard your own mind. Fear is another one that we can fall into, and that's, I think, an underlying base of fear is both ignorance and ill will. That it has a very negative and paralyzing effect on the mind. That once we give in to fear, then we're helpless. There's some advice in the Vinaya about making decisions wisely, and if a decision is based on delusion, anger, fear, or greed, it's going to be a wrong decision. You're going to do the wrong thing. So you should examine your motives for any action, any decision you're undertaking. Make sure you're not acting out of delusion, fear, anger, or greed. Greed has many, the lopa root has many iterations, many ways that's expressed as well. There's greed for sense pleasures. There's desire for more intangible things like manifestations of bhava tanha, the desire to be more popular or be more successful, be more than you are. And some of the forms that it can take also include envy, when you're envious of another's success, and meanness or selfishness. In the Jataka stories, one of the repeated characters that comes up in several of the stories is the miserly rich man who lives a miserable life. Even though he has great wealth, he is loath to spend it. And he certainly doesn't give any of it away or help others, but he's even miserly on spending on himself. So he lives like a pauper, but he has great piles of money. It's considered to be one of the most foolish and counterproductive ways of being. There's one of these Jataka stories, there's a Brahmin, and the Brahmins are often come off very badly in the Jatakas. This Brahmin who's very wealthy, and he's like this, he wants to keep all this money, and one time he visiting somebody's house, and he gets offered a bowl of some kind of special dish, some kind of rice curry dish, and it's so delicious, and keeps wanting more, and he tells his cook to make him some, but he doesn't want that. He says if they can smell that in the house, then everybody's going to want some. So he has it delivered to him out in the forest. He goes wait in the forest. He's going to be bored of it. So Saka comes down from heaven to test him, and brings some other gods with him, Natali and Wesawana, I think, and they take the form of beggars and ask for some of this rice milk. And he says, "Oh, I'll give you just a little bit. You put it on a leaf." And there's all these plants around with tiny little leaves, but they come back with these giant leaves, and the whole thing, goes from there. It's one of these stories that has some touches of comedy in it. So, envy of others, avarice, meanness, this kind of stinginess, these are all ways that desire can play out. On the positive side, we want to encourage positive states of mind, and this is just as important as discouraging the negative ones. And in the first place, as I said, they should be based on non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. And this is an interesting point that in the Pali, the roots, there's the 3 positive roots and the 3 negative roots. The 3 negative roots are expressed as lobha, moha, dosa. And the positive roots are just given as their negatives, alobha, amoha, adosa. And the positive ones are given as negatives, which would seem to indicate that they're the more natural states of mind. When the mind is free of delusion and greed and hatred, then it will naturally manifest wisdom and compassion and simplicity. And these things are not foreign to our nature, they're innate in our nature. And when we remove the obscurations of the negative states of mind, then the positive ones begin to flourish naturally. And we should make just as much effort to see the positive states and give ourselves. Sometimes we tend to be very hard on ourselves and critical of ourselves, but to look and see that the positive aspects in our mind and encourage them and give them value. One set of positive mind states are the 4 Brahma Viharas, the divine abidings. It was said by the Buddha that the wise person always dwells in the Brahma Viharas, meaning that the spiritually mature person will always have these states as the basis of their emotional life. This is where your heart ought to be. It's metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha. Metta is usually translated as loving kindness, but that's maybe a kind of a weak translation. It's defined as being benevolent, well-wishing, like wishing that beings be well and happy, wishing that they prosper, that they're healthy and successful, they're happy. Like all the Brahma Viharas, this state, if it's going to be spiritually effective, if it's going to cleanse and develop the mind, it needs to be universal. You have to have metta for all living beings. I had one fellow here once said he could have metta for everything except mosquitoes. That's not good. That's not complete. So this means even to have metta for people who hurt us or people who wrong us. You still have metta for them. But to understand this does not mean, metta does not mean that you like a person in that common meaning of like, or you don't necessarily approve of them or want to hang around with them. You don't need to want to. It's not like a affectionate state of mind. It's just a state of mind of may they be well, may they be happy. When I was in Thailand, when we stayed in the jungle, we would do this Paritta chant in Pali that sends a message to all living beings. Paritta means a protective chant, and this is supposed to protect us from scorpions and spiders and things. And we would do this chant, sending metta to the 4 families of snakes and to all creatures, big and small, whether they have 8 legs or 6 legs or 4 legs or no legs or however many. And may they all be well and happy. May they enjoy their life, but may they stay far away from me. So having metta for the scorpion doesn't mean you want to cuddle it or have it crawl in your sleeping bag. It's just may he be happy in his little scorpion existence, but he can do it over there. So if you allow ill will to arise in your mind towards any human or non-human being, then you're not following the Buddhist teaching. And the Buddha said that hatred is not overcome by hatred. Hatred is overcome by love. This is a law eternal. Another aspect of this that's easy to overlook is the very first being that you should have metta for is yourself. May I be well and happy. If you can't have genuine metta for yourself, you can't extend it to anyone else. So it's going to be counterfeit. But if you do, if you fill your heart with metta for yourself, it's not being selfish, because you can't stop there. If you genuinely have loving kindness for yourself, there's no way you can stop there. Your own being is too small a vehicle to hold this state, and it will spill out. And you'll end up having metta generally. So sometimes people make the mistake of not giving themselves due regard, and willing to sacrifice themselves too much for others and be like a victim. No, that's not what metta means. Metta means you first start with yourself. May I be well and happy, and then extend it outwards to everyone else. And the perfection of the state is called breaking down the boundaries, is when you have the same degree of metta for exactly the same degree for yourself, for a dear friend, for a neutral person, and an enemy. There's a story in the Visuddhimagga to illustrate this. The four monks were together on a journey. There's the one who's kind of like the central character of the story. And one of the other monks is his boyhood friend that he's very fond of. Another one is this crabby old monk that's always giving them a hard time. And the fourth one is just some random monk from another village they picked up on the way. And this guy is seized, the central character, he's seized by some kind of bandits that belong to some kind of a cult that does human sacrifices. And they threaten this monk. They say, we're going to kill one of your party, sacrifice to our god. You can choose which one of the four. And, what do you think he chose? A lot of people would first jump to the conclusion they would say, well, he sacrificed himself. That's the most generous thing. But that's not what the Buddha praised. That's not the most skillful thing. What he said was, it's all the same to me, makes no difference, just draw straws. He had the same regard for every one of the party. A lot of the stories in the Visuddhimagga tend to take a little bit of a gruesome turn, but it would work the same way if instead of something bad happening, it was something good. It was going to be some kind of reward, and one of them has to get it. The other, the next two Brahma-viharas are more or less variations on the first one. Karuna is called compassion in English. And it's close, but it's not exactly what we mean by compassion in English. Compassion, the word in English, comes from a Latin root. It means to suffer with. And that's not what karuna means. Because if it makes you suffer, it's not true karuna. The whole aim and thrust of the Buddhist teaching is to eliminate suffering, reduce suffering in the world, not to find ways to increase it. So if you see someone else suffering and then it makes you feel sad, you suffer vicariously. That's not true karuna. Karuna is the earnest wish that beings not suffer, that they be released from their suffering. And again, it starts with ourself, and it has to be universal, extended to all beings. The opposite is when you wish for someone else to suffer. Then this kind of mental cruelty, which you can be angry at someone and think, oh, I hope he hurts himself. That's the negative opposite, lack of compassion. Compassion is also karuna, is one of the supreme qualities of the Buddha. The Buddha is said to be supreme in wisdom and compassion. And compassion has to be, if it becomes a guide for action, a motivation for action, if it's going to be really skillful and helpful in the world, it has to be tempered and balanced with wisdom. Sometimes we can see people in a state of suffering and we feel an overwhelming urge to do something about it. We want to help, and that's motivated by a good place. That comes from compassion. But then we know from experience that many times you blunder into a situation and you make it worse. So you have to be guided by wisdom. Is this going to actually help? Is this going to actually reduce suffering? And part of the wisdom is recognizing when there's nothing you can do. then you stand back. You still have compassion. Your wisdom keeps you from interfering. But if you can help, if you can benefit other beings, then any action you take will be meritorious. It will be very good karma if you can help redeem the suffering of beings. Mudita is called sympathetic joy, and this is kind of the opposite of compassion. In the compassion, we focus on the suffering of beings. With sympathetic joy, we suffer on the happiness of beings. We focus on the happiness of beings. And the wish here is, may all beings continue to enjoy the happiness they have found. The opposite, the negative state, is envy. When someone else's success or happiness makes you upset, then you're lacking this quality of sympathetic joy. And this is a joyful state of mind. One can rejoice in the happiness of others. There are different degrees and sources of happiness. One passage has 3 kinds of happiness, or 3 grades of happiness. One is ordinary worldly happiness, happiness that comes from having good objects, pleasant objects for the senses, of having good health, of having security in the life, worldly, mundane happiness. And that is a form of happiness, but its basis is insecure and uncertain. And it's the lowest grade of happiness. Then the middling grade is the happiness of jhana, when the mind in meditation finds its internally generated states of bliss. That's the middling grade of happiness, because it's not dependent on the external world, it's not dependent on the senses. So it has some more security than the first, but it's still considered to be impermanent and subject to loss. And the third kind, the highest kind of happiness, is the happiness beyond happiness, the experience of nibbana, the unconditioned, the release from samsara, which is without parallel. And when we have mudita, we're rejoicing in any kind of happiness that beings experience. And this includes the ordinary happiness of the world. The example given in the Visuddhimagga to illustrate mudita says that if you see someone riding by on a richly adorned elephant, in modern times we'd say, he's got a brand new BMW, and that makes you, if that moves your heart to happiness, oh, may this fellow is so happy, may he continue to be happy in this way. That's mudita. The fourth Brahmavihara is upekkha, which is equanimity. And this is a very important quality in many contexts. In terms of the Brahmaviharas, which is only one context that upekkha occurs, in terms of the Brahmaviharas, it's considered to transcend or be a higher spiritual state than the other 3, because it's not based on any aspiration or wish. There's just a recognition of things as they are. And upekkha as a Brahmavihara means equanimity towards beings. So the contemplation here is not may they be happy or may they not suffer. It's nothing like that, because you're not wishing for anything different than what is. You're just recognizing that beings are as they are, dependent on their karma. And it's recognizing a deep sense of the equality of all beings, human and non-human, that they're all subject to conditions, they're all existing in their particular state as they are according to their karma. They're all at some different point in the cycle. They're all experiencing some results of their past karma. And they are as they are. A deeper aspect of equanimity or upekkha is the equanimity towards all phenomena, all dhammas, that one is not discriminating between objects, but seeing fundamentally void nature, fundamentally imperfect nature, and the fundamentally impermanent nature of each object. And that's the kind of equanimity that we develop with vipassana meditation. These are examples of equanimity as a mental formation, as a sankhara. But another aspect of upekkha is upekkha as a feeling tone. That is, as vedana, the neutral feeling. And that has a whole range of application. At the very simplest level, it's just a common state of mind when something impinges on the mind, with a sight, a sound, whatever, and it's neither pleasurable nor painful, it's just neutral. And the mind just doesn't react with that feeling. But at the highest level, upekkha can become a very powerful spiritual quality when there's a deep contentment and a peacefulness with what is. And this is based on wisdom. It's not equanimity of escaping or being dull. It's an equanimity of full engagement in the object, but not reacting to it. Some of the Thai teachers who would talk about avoiding what they call water buffalo equanimity. A water buffalo is a very stolid beast. It doesn't react very easily to anything. And that's not what's meant by a spiritual quality of equanimity. You're not peaceful because you're dull, but you're peaceful because you're wise, and you're not. You're beyond reaction. The highest state of vipassana meditation that can be attained by striving is equanimity of formations. When the mind has reached a state where it's completely peaceful, but it's wide awake and alert and doesn't miss anything. And this is not yet enlightenment, but it's the place from which enlightenment can happen. And there's nothing to be done at that stage. It's just let it unfold. And the fourth and highest jhana is based on equanimity. Transcend rapture and bliss, and what's beyond that is equanimity. So another way of talking about skillful and unskillful emotions is to focus on the aspect of the vedana, the feeling tone. And generally they're classed as three types of feelings: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And of course it's more nuanced than that, because there's a whole range, it's a whole spectrum. Something can be mildly unpleasant and slightly irritating, or it can be agonizingly painful, or anything in between. Same with pleasure. And even neutral can either be, as we say, can be a dull kind of neutrality, or it can be a wide awake transcendence is drowning. And of these three, it's interesting to contemplate the teaching from the Abhidhamma that unpleasant feeling, domanassa, or the mental dukkha, is always associated with unskillful states of mind. Upekkha and somanassa, or joyful states of mind, can be either skillful or unskillful depending on context. But domanassa is always unskillful. Or it's not, that should be a little bit more precisely stated. It's not in itself unskillful, but it's associated with unskillful states. Now you have to be somewhat careful how you hear that teaching, because I have seen some people, when they're exposed to that teaching, that makes them upset because they feel bad about themselves because they're sad or something. That's not what you should take from it. Until you're a fully enlightened arahant, you will experience from time to time sadness. But to recognize that is not in itself of any value. It's natural, but it's an unskillful state of mind. When the Buddha reached Parinibbana, or as we'd say, when he died, when he passed from this body, it said that all the monks who were not yet fully enlightened, they wept and wailed and beat their chests. Oh, the master is no more. But the monks who were arahants, they just nodded their heads and said, so it is, so it is. As the master always said, that which is subject to birth is subject to death. Joyfulness or happy states of mind are generally to be encouraged. Joy is considered one of the enlightenment factors, and the jhanas are joyful states of mind. Happiness or joy, in terms of our actions, it's a karma intensifier, both for good or for ill. If you perform any action, if it's a good action, an action of kindness, generosity, helpfulness, if you're joyful or happy while you're doing it, then it's more meritorious. The karma is stronger. But likewise, if you do something evil, bad, you hurt somebody, you do something unkind, then if that makes you happy, if you feel joy in that cruelty, then it's worse. You make worse karma than if you just do it coldly. So these are all various kind of examples and approaches to knowing the various states of mind that it's possible to have arisen, and to return to the original point. The effort should be, first of all, in recognizing what states are present in the mind, and encouraging and letting flourish those states that are wholesome and good, and discouraging and diminishing in trying to keep out those states that are harmful. And then we're practicing the path factor of right effort.
Handamayam Dhammakataya Sadhukaram Dadamase Sadhu 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 Anumodami.